Hello friends, my name is Hans Rueffert and welcome once again to the Gesundheit kitchen. We are exploring superfoods, and to do that we chose the Harvard University's top 10 list of superfoods. And any chance I have to work with my friend Dr. Ellen Steinberg is a good enough reason for me, and so we traveled out to Athens to talk to her about the nutritional benefits of dark leafy greens. So let's kind of start with that as a superfood. Why should we work in these leafy greens?
When something is like an iceberg lettuce, you know there's a lot of water in these. These still contain water, of course, by the nature of being leaf.
Yep.
But they're very dark in color, which gives us a hint. Color is so important. Even with the red here and the dark green, you're getting a lot of different, folic acid, you're getting phytonutrients. There's a lot in these leaves just by the essence of it being a plant.
Right.
You know that you're getting a lot of vitamins and minerals, but other things are these phytonutrients, these chemicals that also have health benefits. So if I were to make a salad, I would certainly choose something dark and green like that, as opposed to something a little bit more pale. Not saying that lettuce isn't a wonderful thing. It's great for hydration, and if you like it, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
But it's not going to pack the punch that something like this would.
I know from our previous professional working together, we did a class once, I think it was called like Eat the Rainbow or Taste the Rainbow.
Yes.
Specifically talking about how those darker colored fruits and vegetables, or even some of the grains, seem to have just a higher nutrition content, maybe not astronomically higher than, so I think you had even said, I'd rather you eat iceberg lettuce than not eating lettuce, but if you're gonna eat it, I'd rather you eat the darker, say, romaine or spinach versus eating the iceberg lettuce.
Exactly, and as you mentioned, especially if you don't have a stomach, you want to get a lot for your bang for your buck. So yes, but if iceberg lettuce is the only lettuce you like, that's great.
Yeah, better than nothing. Better than not eating.
Absolutely.
So I am back with my my haul of all of these fantastic greens, and it's always kind of like confusing, like what do I use for what? You can eat all of them raw, and I should say that because there is sort of this kind of misconception that some of these things you have to cook to death, but in reality you can eat all of them raw. Sometimes we do get more nutrition from them if we do cook them a little bit. It kind of breaks down that outer protective layer, and but I tend to tell people that I don't cook my greens, I threaten them. And so we're just going to do a real light saute so we keep the flavor and color. But just to kind of go over again what we have here, we have kind of this nice butter crunch lettuce, we have a red romaine, standard romaine, Swiss chard, which you can eat all of that. It's got beautiful stems going on there, different colors. This is a curly kale, we have lacinato kale, spinach, red kale, but also things like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, good old head of cabbage. All of those are in that brassica family, and they're naturally high in sulfur, just a great anti-cancer food, high in fiber, all of the things that Dr. Steinberg talked about. So very simple, quick preparation. My grandmother would have cooked greens for hours on end to the point where the whole house would smell like greens. I want to focus on quick, efficient, and flavorful. So let me get this thing fired up. Might get slightly loud for just a moment. Alrighty. So I want to get my aromatics going first. So aromatics basically meaning things like my onions, my garlic, my spices, to kind of get those working in the pan while I chop my greens. And I'm going to start with some mustard seeds. Now, mustard is another one of those. Actually, mustard greens are edible, can be slightly bitter, but the same nutritional properties that are in the leafy greens actually are sometimes even more present in the seed. And I'm using this really as a flavoring component there, right? Mustard, as you know, has got that sort of kind of spicy, for lack of a better word, kind of astringent quality going on. So I'm going to dry toast these just for a moment, and then I'm going to add my fat, or in this case I'm going to use an olive oil. You can use butter if you'd like. You can use any of those kind of high temp oils. I tend not to use the extra virgin so much for high cooking. But again, whatever you have on hand, don't run out and buy an oil just specifically for that. Into there, I'm going to put a couple cloves of garlic, and I like having actual slices or chunks of garlic in when I eat these things. So you can mince it, or you can just kind of rough chop it, which is what I typically do. Again, there's really wonderful properties in garlic beyond the flavor. It's an antimicrobial, it's an antifungal, but more importantly, it's just delicious. And I'm going to wake that up, and into there I'm going to add just a bit of a white onion, and this is kind of a personal preference thing, as much or as little as you like. This is about 1/4 of a white onion. We are in summer at the time that I'm doing this, so they're not overly kind of sharp. But as you get into winter, sometimes onions can get really, really sharp. If you're crying as you're cutting the onion, you might want to scale back just a little bit. Usually that means it's a sharper onion. So, all right, as that starts to sweat, we're going to get our greens. Now, almost all of these greens will have sort of the leaf portion, and then they're going to have this what we call a rib. And that's totally edible as well, but it is very, very fibrous. Think of this as sort of the skeleton. I mean, again, it's the rib of the plant, and so this is what kind of holds it upright and erect. And I'm going to remove that if we're just using this again as a kind of a green as a thing. I don't necessarily want to have this in there. If you're making a pesto, that's a great thing to save for that application, because you put it in food processor and kind of just whiz it up. We might have even done that on a show before. We've done several times. We've used these kind of leafy greens. So just gonna remove this. You can use your fingers or you can use the knife, depending on how fibrous it is. But you can see again, I'm almost just pulling this off like zipper peas almost. And here we go. And then I'm gonna chop this into bite-sized pieces. Keep that going. Here, I'm gonna waft some of this your way. It smells fantastic. If you can't smell it, it's time to upgrade whatever you're watching it on. Then to the lacinato kale, I'm going to add collards. And again, in the South, there is this kind of misconception that you have to cook these things until they are no longer green. But I want to keep them green. I want to have that vibrant, bright color. I just want to give them a quick saute so that they're easier to digest and you get more of the nutrition out of it. So I'm going to take these greens and just kind of rough chop them. Not worried about trying to keep them separate. And if your knife skills aren't great, you could tear these up by hand. But don't worry so much about uniformity. Just worried about getting them kind of bite-sized, so you don't have to wrestle with them too much once they start cooking. All right, there's our greens. Just another quick saute. You can see how that's all starting to sweat together. Right before I add the greens, I'm going to add a little bit of salt. And if you have smoked salt, that works really well in this application too. Typically when you cook greens, especially in the South, you would have a ham hock or you'd have a little bits of bacon. That's fine too, but I tend to eat more plant-based, so I'm going to use a little smoked salt in there is great. You can always add salt at the end, right? So don't worry too much about trying to get the saltiness on the front side, because if you oversalt it, you can't take it out. If you undersalt it, you can always add it. Even while it's on your plate, you can add a little salt there at the very end. All right, one of the flavors I like to have with greens are fruit things. So it could be, you could have golden raisins, but definitely apples and greens make a wonderful pairing. So I'm just gonna do a quick core out of there. And depending on the apple, if it's a thin skin like this, you don't need to peel it. If it's a thick skin, and you'd kind of know, like if it's an apple that you can just take a bite out of and eat, as a hand apple, you don't necessarily have to peel it. And it also depends really if it's an organic apple or not. If it's not organic, you probably should peel it, because oftentimes that's where it would have been sprayed. But this is an organic apple. And luckily I live a stone's throw from apple growing country. So I'm going to throw a half an apple in there as well. And I don't want the apple to cook too much. I just want to have it where it's warmed through. And same with the greens here. I just want it where they're starting to wilt. The onions are already nice and translucent. The garlic has already worked its way into the oil. Got that little bit of mustard seed in there. All right, then last, I'm going to turn that off. So there's something called carryover cooking. So once I turn this off, there's no more active heat coming, but that pan is still hot. So the greens are going to continue to cook for just a little bit. Anything you cook, once you turn the skillet off, it doesn't mean that it all of a sudden gets cold. So you kind of have to factor that into your timing when you're cooking. That just remember that when you turn it off, you still have this sort of downward slope of the cool off factor that's still actively cooking this. All right, this is looking good. I'm gonna plate this up. And this makes a wonderful side dish. You could put this family style in the middle of the table for everybody to enjoy. But you could also make a batch of this, keep it in the fridge, add this to a grain salad, which is something I do quite often. And you can also add this to scrambled eggs if you're making like a quick omelet in the morning. What a great thing to have on hand. And by undercooking them like this, they'll still be green and healthy and vibrant. They'll just be cool. And so you can just warm them up, add a couple of scrambled eggs. All right, that looks pretty good there. All right, so the last thing before I would eat this, I would check it for salt, which I'm pretty sure it probably needs just a tiny bit of salt on top of there. And then I like to eat a little vinegar with my greens, and that's also a very southern thing. Sometimes you'd have like a pepper vinegar where it has little spicy peppers in there, but just to have that kind of bit of brightness, I want to have, this is just a white wine vinegar. I'm just going to take just a few drops on top of that. Again, you can always add more, but I'm not going to add them to the bulk while I'm cooking because that would make them brown a little faster. So just as a condiment, a few drops of vinegar on there are really magic. And that is a fantastic way to enjoy incredibly healthy superfood dark leafy greens. Want to say thank you once again to our dear friend Dr. Ellen Steinberg, who's been kind of our tour guide as we work down the list of our 10 superfoods. I kind of always like to reiterate that you can't control your genetics, you can't control your diagnosis, but nutrition is the one thing as a patient or even as a caregiver, this is the one thing that we can really grasp hold of and control. So this might not be your cup of tea, but try to figure out ways that you can sneak in these types of foods. This list of superfoods, it's not the entire list of foods that you should eat, but it's a good starting point if you're worried about nutrition, if you care about nutrition. And I assume that if you stuck with me through this video this long, I have to hope that that you're wanting to improve the way you eat. So thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on the next and every episode of the Gesundheit Kitchen. Take care of yourself.